So again, this is typical class warfare by Tim Keller, as we looked at in our previous programs. Now, Tim Keller, again, is very, very influential. And a lot of people are quoting and being influenced by Tim Keller, who go on to be the pastors of churches, and in some cases are very well-known pastors, and some of them become the presidents of church denominations and associations. Recently, the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant denomination in America, or Protestant association, elected a new president. His name is J.D. Greear. And young J.D. Greear, I've done a little research on him and found out, I think he's supposed to be the youngest Southern Baptist president ever elected. He's written many books. One of them is a book called Gospel, subtitled Recovering the Power That Made Christianity Revolutionary. And who wrote the foreword? Tim Keller. So I believe the Southern Baptist Convention here in June of 2018 has just elected a man that promotes cultural Marxism. He is big into promoting white privilege and racial reconciliation and a lot of the terms that are used as a part of social justice. But his book, Gospel, has the foreword written by Tim Keller. In the book, here is what J.D. Greear, the new president of the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, why do I bring this up? Because some of you are not even Southern Baptists. You're like, why do I care? Because this is the largest Protestant denomination in America. And this just shows you how cultural Marxism is being accepted. And the Southern Baptist Convention elected J.D. Greear, whose ideas on white privilege and racial reconciliation, and again, racial reconciliation sounds great until you start understanding what that means, and their definitions of racial reconciliation is to understand that we need to make reparations, or we need to talk about our white privilege, and it's just a lot of race baiting and the creation of racial offenses that creates division. It doesn't fix any problems, it makes the problems worse by highlighting racial offenses, many of them that do not exist, and blaming the problems of a sinful, fallen society on race, or blaming the high unemployment in the black community on Christians and capitalists, as we see David Platt has done in a previous program, declaring that racism is alive and well, evident by the high unemployment in the black community, or high crime in the black community. That's not because of racism on the part of white, conservative, free market Christians or free market capitalists. That's because, as we've seen before, of socialist big government policies that have limited the opportunity for entry-level jobs in the black community. The high crime in these black communities is often black-on-black crime. And we've done entire programs on that, so we won't plow that field again. But the point is this: the Southern Baptist Convention has just elected a guy by the name of J.D. Greear, who is quoting men and being influenced by men like Tim Keller, who we have looked at, is embracing the idea of mixing, I believe, Marxism and Christianity. And in his book, Gospel, J.D. Greear, the new president of the Southern Baptist Convention, says that he dedicates the book in part to Tim Keller, to quote, "To Tim Keller, whose thinking has so permeated my own that I can no longer really tell where his stops and mine starts. I'm heavily indebted to him for many of the ideas in this book, particularly in chapters 2, 3, and 6. I have listened to and read Tim Keller so much that I tend to plagiarize his interpretation of a passage before I even hear him teach on that passage." And then he goes on in the book to quote other very troubling people. He says about chapter 7, quote, "I have heard this interpretation of Jesus' words several times over the years, most recently from Tim Keller, Rob Bell, and Ken Sande." Well, of course, that's very troubling that he is quoting Tim Keller, and it's very troubling that he's quoting Rob Bell, who is part of the emergent church and denies major essential Christian doctrines. My point in bringing this up is, again, that Tim Keller is very influential beyond what most of you even understand, and he's influencing many of the churches, church denominations, and he's influencing many of your children and grandchildren. I hear routinely from parents and grandparents that their children have read the books and watched the sermons of Tim Keller and are now buying into his social justice, which is a form of really Marxianity, mixing socialism with Christianity or liberation theology. Now, again, if you want more on this, go back to part 2 in our series on Marxianity, and you'll hear more about Tim Keller. So again, we also find over there at the website of the church that J.D. Greear is pastor at, they held a series. Quote, "This 3-week course will provide a Christian perspective on America's history and future regarding ethnic relations. Come and discuss black history, white privilege, wokeness, together with your fellow believers in a safe and gospel-centered environment. Leave with practical action steps to make the church and our society a multi-ethnic haven, end quote. Now, what is wokeness? I know what white privilege is, but what is wokeness? I never heard of that until recently. Wokeness is the idea that you are awakened to the understanding of that which you didn't even know existed, like your white privilege. So you are woken to the understanding that because you're white, you automatically get privileges that other people don't get. Well, that's a little interesting because I live in the Memphis, Tennessee area where oftentimes when I sit in a restaurant and I look around, I'm the only white dude in the joint. I'm the only white guy in the restaurant. I don't care. Doesn't bother me. Oftentimes in stores and restaurants, I'm the minority. So I'm getting a little tired of hearing about all this white privilege, and somehow because certain people are Christians and white and capitalist, they're getting certain privileges other people aren't getting. Well, I wasn't elected president of the United States twice, but Barack Obama was. I've not sat on the Supreme Court, but Thurgood Marshall did. Clarence Thomas has. I've never been chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs, yet Colin Powell was. All of these are black Americans, by the way. I've never been Secretary of State, yet Colin Powell was, as well as was Condoleezza Rice. I've never been a senator or a governor or a congressman, and yet there are many black Americans that have been. I'm not worth millions upon millions and millions of dollars, but there are a lot of black Americans that are. So I'm kind of wondering, when is this white privilege thing going to kick in for me? You see, this is manufactured, totally manufactured. And who's pushing it? J.D. Greear, now president of the Southern Baptist Convention at his church. But if you understand the so-called invisible privileges you're getting, and this finally dawns on you, then you have awoken to it. So it's called wokeness. You got to wake up to the invisible privileges you have that you don't even know about. This is nothing more than communism, Marxism, I believe. You don't believe me? Then maybe you need to understand what white privilege is. We have an entire program, a couple programs on white privilege, and you'll find those at wvwtv.com, or by now they're probably archived at situationroom.net. You can even go to our online biblical worldview software program, worldviewpedia.com, put in white privilege, and read transcripts and watch video clips on it. But if you want to learn a little more about what white privilege is and how it's really the promotion of anti-capitalist, free market, anti-Christian values, then all you need to do is watch these video clips, undercover video clips from the 15th annual White Privilege Conference in Madison, Wisconsin from a few years ago. We have these video clips embedded at worldviewpedia.com. Watch this.
So what do I mean by Christian hegemony? Very simply, I define it as the everyday, pervasive, deep-seated, and institutionalized dominance of Christian values, Christian institutions, leaders, and Christians as a group, primarily for the benefit of Christian ruling elites. So that's very similar to how we might define racism or sexism or other systems of oppression.
So how do you define racism? Christians. That's what he just said. That's what he just said. That's very similar to how we would define racism. What? People with Christian values. Now watch this next clip where this speaker at the 15th Annual White Privilege Conference in Madison, Wisconsin, describes capitalists as racists.
So in this particular study, it showed that if you were more inclined to free market capitalism, you had a higher tendency of holding ethnocentric values. For me, capitalism is like the all-consuming thing. Capitalism maintains white supremacy, white privilege, racism, sexism, patriarchy, heteronormativity, you name it, capitalism.
So, capitalism and white privilege, racism, oppression, they all go together. You say white privilege, what you're really talking about are capitalists. And if you're talking about capitalists and those with white privilege, you're talking about people who are racist. And if you're talking about capitalist and Christian values and racist, you're talking about oppressors. What is the goal here? The goal here is to point to the source of all suffering and oppression as being Christianity and capitalism. Now, I wonder who said that. Yeah, the Frankfurt School. And I wonder what the Frankfurt School came up with. Oh, cultural Marxism. Yeah, the Frankfurt School, it came to America in 1933 at the invitation of John Dewey, who helped start the Socialist Society, openly wrote about the fact that they wanted to convince people here in America, using education and the media, that the source of all suffering and oppression was Christianity and capitalism. Now I wonder who else had the goal of attacking Christians and capitalists. Oh, that would be Karl Marx, who said, "My object in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism." So can I ask you why, again, would the Southern Baptist Convention elect a young guy by the name of J.D. Greear, who's promoting, among other things, Tim Keller, and says the following: "To Tim Keller, whose thinking has permeated my own that I can no longer really tell where his stops and mine starts. I'm heavily indebted to him for many of the ideas in this book, particularly in chapters 2, 3, and 6. And again, he's promoted white privilege. So let's ask ourselves, now that we know they're so big on social justice and poverty and bringing non-believers into the church, why is it they're so big on bringing non-believers into the church? We heard Tim Keller say, create a church for the non-believers.